Support for 10,000 Things comes from Third Place Books. With 3 store locations in Seattle, Washington, Third Place Books offers a wide selection of books, gifts, and over 250 author readings a year, in-store or online at thirdplacebooks.com.
What does it mean to live a good life? On the acclaimed podcast No Small Endeavor, produced by Great Feeling Studios and PRX, theology professor Lee C. Camp explores this question every week, sitting down with courageous and impassioned people from all walks of life, like Hollywood legend Rob Reiner and New York Times bestselling author Gretchen Rubin. Like our show, the podcast covers intimate stories from the past and future, from conversations on cultural Korean beauty standards with TED Talks daily host Elise Hu, to discussions on how our religious differences should be treasured with Interfaith America founder Eboo Patel. Together, they'll figure out what it means to find true happiness and how we can all flourish in our day-to-day life. Don't miss out. Follow No Small Endeavor on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I think of objects as often being imbued with a certain magic or vibrational energy, particularly those things that are handmade and passed down to us from another person. If you were to visit my house, you'd notice things that I've collected and put on display, like the little yarn lion that my grandmother crocheted for me as a child, which sits on my ancestor altar, or the colorful origami cranes that brighten up the corners of my home. My mother folded 500 of those for my wedding day. At the end of last summer, my mother-in-law Ellen returned something to me that I'd left behind from my days spent living near her in Dallas, Texas. Something I thought would never come into my possession or that I'd hold in my 2 hands again. It was a mask of my face that Ellen had made with her own hands 24 years ago, when I was just 24, and it had hung on the wall of her library ever since. It was a remnant of another time when I was a different version of me. A time when I hadn't yet married her son, Court. A time when I felt that my life depended on fitting into the white world of Texas that they were a part of, but I was not. A time when I tried to fit in by doing things that weren't me. Like driving the short mile to the grocery store instead of walking, or using the word y'all. A time when I even altered my reading habits, reading the Dallas Morning News instead of the New York Times to be able to make small talk with the locals. Seeing the mask again got me to thinking about the ways in which I've revealed myself to others or kept parts of myself hidden, masked. In my own family, in my husband's Texan family. Masking is often a way to survive a world that is critical, a world that would have us believe that we are not enough. But sometimes the mask renders us unrecognizable, and sometimes the mask slips off. A couple of months ago, I uploaded a photo of the mask to my Instagram account, and my producer Whitney noticed the posting. She had all these questions about where it came from and what it symbolized to me. So today, we offer a different kind of 10,000 Things episode. Whitney and I sat down to discuss the complexities of an interracial partnership and the story behind my poet's death mask. This is 10,000 Things, a podcast about modern-day artifacts of Asian American life and the stories they reveal. I'm your host, Shin Yu. Today, the mask.
Support for 10,000 Things comes from Third Place Books. With 3 store locations in Seattle, Washington, Third Place Books offers a wide selection of books, gifts, and over 250 author readings a year, in-store or online at thirdplacebooks.com.
Hi, I'm Sasha Koka, host of the California Report magazine. Every week, we bring you stories about what connects us in the giant, diverse Golden State. Because what happens in California changes the world.
I love this place. We were once seen as like the place to be, California. The land of milk and honey. That's where you go to Sunshine State, but we just have challenges right now.
KQED's California Report magazine. New episodes drop every Friday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to 10,000 Things. As I mentioned, in this episode, we're doing things a little differently. Today, I'm the one who's being interviewed. Our producer, Whitney Henry Lester, will be asking the questions.
Okay, so your whole podcast is about Asian American identity. You obviously identify strongly with that as part of your own identity. And I know that your husband is white and from Texas. What about his family? Tell me when you first met them and what it was like to get to know them.
You know, it was kind of a blur. I remember meeting his father, who's very charismatic, outgoing person, very tall also. And meeting his mother, who is an artist. My own mother is an artist, but, you know, she works in a very different discipline. And I remember feeling very intimidated by Ellen. I had been told that she was like a high school beauty queen, like a homecoming queen. And she had these two different eyes, colors. She has like a blue eye and a gray eye, kind of like David Bowie. And, you know, just like she's glamorous, beautiful Texas woman. And so I remember one night, maybe it was like an early night of getting to know each other. They wanted to take us out to dinner. And, you know, they'd been sharing family stories with me, their family stories about their various relatives. And I don't necessarily register that they were funny stories. They were just family stories. So at one point, Frank or Ellen asked me if I could share a story about my own family. And I was taken a little bit off guard, but, you know, I rolled out a story, you know, that my husband hadn't even heard. My boyfriend Court hadn't even heard this story from me. And, you know, my parents, they were born and grew up during the Japanese occupation, which was succeeded by martial law and a period of white terror in Taiwan. And, you know, a period of time when a lot of people disappeared or were like sent to hard labor on Green Island. And so it was like a really rough period of time for a lot of people. So they're asking me about, you know, like a story that you heard a lot growing up. So, you know, I whip out this story about my second uncle, my father's second oldest brother. And the story that my father would tell me when I was very young is that there was this period of time where second uncle was on the lam because he had been in a car accident that had resulted in him striking and killing a child. And it was an accident. It was like the kid ran into the street. He was driving a truck and he picked up the kid, took him to the doctor and tried to save him. But to no avail, this child died, and the consequences were pretty dire. It would have meant imprisonment, if not like punishment by death. Second uncle went on the lam. And, you know, a lot of what my father's memories were during this period too were of colonial occupation and trauma. And so my father could remember, for instance, coming home and the soldiers from the Nationalist Army that were squatting in my grandfather's properties would be surrounding the family with guns to their heads. And he had these very hard memories of this period of time. So my future in-laws, have just asked me, like, tell us a story that you grew up hearing. And these were the things that came to mind because I'm sorry, there were no happy stories. There just weren't. And so I remember the silence, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. And my partner, he was like, damn, I never heard you tell that story. And then I just thought I was trying to be myself in a moment when I thought it was safe to be myself. And I think that what I delivered was something a little bit different or outside than what was expected.
Well, you exposed the cultural differences very early and in a way they weren't yet ready for.
Completely. But I also don't think like white people. I think there was part of that where they just thought maybe I would think like them. And the fact is I don't. So I think that there was for me the feeling that I was not in the racial majority. And so if I were to raise an issue or a sensitivity or a bias, that it would be easy to brush under the carpet as Shin Yu's just sensitive. And so I think there were probably times when I didn't talk about things that upset me or affected me because I felt in some ways that it wouldn't be understood or it would render me unacceptable.
I saw you post on Instagram about a mask that you now have at your house that your mother-in-law made. And in the photo, it's this plaster white mask. It's this white and smooth looking face of yours. You look very young, the smooth skin, baby skin in the plaster. But you also have this almost frozen in time, slightly macabre look to it. It looks almost like a dead face. It's not a serene person. It's not a happy person. So can you tell me the origin of this mask?
Yeah, so Ellen is a figure artist, primarily working in 2D, and she had been taking a class in which she was learning how to plaster cast faces, and she had cast everybody in the family, her husband Frank, her other son Chip, and then my partner Court. She needed some bodies to practice on. She had mentioned it pretty intentionally, and I don't believe that I ever necessarily expressed enthusiasm or excitement about it. I remember that Court and I were going over there for dinner one Sunday. But when we arrived, my memory is that all the materials for plaster casting had been mixed and they were ready to go. And then suddenly I was in this situation where I wasn't quite consenting to have my face cast, but here we were. I had been in the city with Court. You know, we had lived apart in different cities for a long time, and now we were together, and I'd been in town for maybe like 1 or 2 weeks. And here was this situation where I was being expected to behave in a certain way. And if I didn't behave in a certain way, it might reflect poorly on me with his family, but it might also create tension between himself and his mother, because I wasn't compliant or easygoing. And it put me in this impossible situation in which I can't say that there was consent, and I can't say that this was a time 20 years ago when people talked about consent in the same way that they did. They just didn't. So I ended up going down this path of having my face cast. And so what it involved was Vaseline put on my face to coat it, to protect it from the material when it would kind of get sucked off at the end of the process. And I remember that there was like a long strip of cotton that was like put around my face to kind of protect my hair from getting mixed in with the plaster. The material was very cold and gloopy and thick going onto my skin and just kind of like ran down my face. And the worst part of it was probably that I had to breathe through plastic straws inserted up my nostrils. I just about had a panic attack. It was so stressful for me to sit there with my eyes closed in the darkness and to not be able to communicate for something like that felt like an eternity. It was probably 10 or 12 minutes. It was quick drying plaster, but it was something that I hadn't been prepared to experience. And it was physically invasive to, you know, my space and my body, and psychically it affected me very deeply.
Do you remember what went through your head when you were frozen still and breathing through your straw nostrils?
I thought I was going to die, and I was really trying to not hyperventilate, and I was trying very hard to not panic, and I couldn't think about anybody else in the room. I felt really sealed off from people, and I was just counting the moments until it could be over.
And then what happened when the 12 minutes were up?
You know, I think it dries off, and then because there's been this, you know, kind of substance that's been put on your face, almost like a lubricant or oil, it allows for like the release of the material that just kind of like pops off, you know, and there's like I think I remembered like a sound, like the suction of the air as it released from my face. And yeah, it was such a strange experience then to be liberated from that and to be in the light again. And I don't think I remember much after that.
Do you remember seeing it? The mask itself?
Vaguely, I may have seen it immediately after or in the days after, because I remembered that there were parts of it that needed some cleanup. It wasn't complete at that point, but it was a representation of my face at the age of 24, looking uncomfortable.
And when you think back now, do you have a clear understanding of why you didn't say no?
I didn't actually feel like no was an option. I mean, I grew up in this Asian American family where There were terrible boundaries. And I think for myself as an Asian American girl, there was no option ever to say no. No is like talking back. So I think that trauma informed for a long time the ways that I understood what decisions were or were not available to me. Nobody offered me an opportunity to say no. Why did I not stand up for myself? Because I had no practice doing so. I didn't know it was an option. As an Asian American woman, I was accustomed to assimilating and making myself small to fit into situations so that I could have safety. You know, there was something that I wanted out of these people, to feel a sense of belonging or tribe in a strange land or place. And so if the trade or the deal with the devil that is being made is that I have to put myself through some discomfort that I've never tolerated before, how bad could it be?
What happened to the mask after that? Like, what's your next memory of interacting with the mask?
It was hung on the wall of my partner's mother's library, and it hung on top of the doorway, the door frame, as you entered into the kitchen. I was up there alongside this family of white faces, 3 men and 1 woman, and then there was me. And it was a strange, strange sight to me. I think sometimes of like trophy heads, from hunts. I think about the shockingness of the contrast between my features, my face, and them, and how that felt to me so jarring, but to them perhaps it was, commonplace.
How did you reconcile that? Like, you were, in an intercultural relationship, and that was reflected in those masks. Like, what made the contrast so jarring in a problematic way?
It's hard to describe. It's like when you're in your body, you don't necessarily know what your body looks like unless you're walking past a window or past a mirror. And, I think about when I was like a very young person in this household with just my Taiwanese mother and no real other contact with like outside people. I didn't really understand how we were different from other people at all in like our appearance or in our language or our racialized features. I just had like no idea. And I think I remember being in elementary school and like kids telling me that I looked different than them, like, my features, my eyes, or my hair. And I had no idea. I thought that I was literally like everybody else. I don't think I thought I was blonde, but I probably thought I had blue eyes. And it was just like, I didn't understand that difference until somebody told me or pointed it out. And I think that looking upon those masks side by side was also like one of those moments of profound racial consciousness and difference that, I did not fit in a very physical, outward way, and that there was a disjunctiveness about that. And I think maybe to me also not exactly a sadness. I mean, the sadness is not about, I'm not with my family. Where are my family's masks? It wasn't that kind of thing. It was maybe more the consciousness of the distance from my family of origin or my culture of origin. And yeah, that feeling perhaps of fragmented identity.
Did that just pop up every time you went there? It was always above the door to the kitchen, and you would continue to see it over the years? Or how did you interact with it over the years?
They just kind of stayed where they were. And I think like I felt a level of discomfort looking at myself. Like as I grew older and I aged and I matured and I gained a better sense of myself, and I think a confidence in who I am. And I own my Asian Americanness now in a way that was so hard for me as a young person. And I think that seeing that mask over and over again reminded me of a part of myself that I couldn't quite perhaps respect or love. And that is why I asked for it back.
Tell me if this is true. It sounds like, over the years as you grew, that mask reminded you of the confidence that you didn't have back then, as opposed to growing more into that image. That image was sort of frozen. represented that time when you felt differently about it.
It represented this time when I didn't feel like I had agency or power to say no or to speak up or to speak my truth. And it represented almost, I think, in some ways, a betrayal of self. I think over the years, I've come to understand that abandoning oneself is never a good thing. And sometimes we have to do that disassociation in order to survive. And that was a pattern that was very consistent for most of my life. And I think that particular moment, it's documented. It was documented that I abandoned myself and I betrayed myself. And that is how I would experience it, as this kind of reminder of the young part of myself that I had left behind in order to survive or to fit in.
So how did you get the guts to ask for it back? How did you do that?
Okay, so how did I do that? Let's see. I decided it was time. It was just like, I knew it. It was time. And it wasn't like I wanted to do some like crazy art project with it and like reclaim it. It was just literally, it's time. So I said to Court, I need you to ask her. And so he asked her and she said, okay, sure. And he's like, well, my mother really wants to talk to you about how to ship it because she needs like a special box or packing supplies. It just really needs you to talk to her about it. So then it dragged on for a couple more weeks because there was on his mother's side the desire to like speak to me about like how it would be shipped, like what kind of box, what kind of packing material, which shipper, do we need like an art vendor shipper? Like it just seemed to be overthinking the task. Certainly it was something that I would have been heartbroken if it had shattered in transit, but I did not want to get involved in the minutiae of that. So eventually it did arrive. And it was a box that was much bigger than I thought it would be because there were two masks inside. There was not just my mask, which I had never handled and held up close or looked at. It was my mask, but it was also a mask that had been made of Court, and they were sent to us together.
So what was your reaction to that?
I thought that was very interesting. Like in Taiwanese or Chinese families, like for instance, when the girl marries out of the family and joins her husband's clan and family, you're considered not part of the family anymore. So for instance, if I died, I would have to be buried with my husband's family, not with my family of origin, for instance. It's just like your property and you've been transferred kind of thing. So I think for me, receiving this mask of my husband almost felt to me like something strange energetically around letting go of family in some way, or like, I think I had this feeling that maybe it was like, he belongs with you. Like objects are obviously really symbolic for me with this show and 10,000 Things. And I don't think like my husband thought much about it. He was probably like, oh, my mask, but I think for me, I was like, that's really interesting.
Did you feel the way you expected when you opened that box?
So I think when I did open the box, I felt like a soul retrieval, like something had been returned to me. Yeah.
That's big. Did that feel like closure?
It felt like the beginning of thinking about the parts that had been abandoned that are being reintegrated now, which is a long process.
When you think about your mother-in-law, I mean, I personally know that can be a delicate relationship. Like, what do you think went wrong in that interaction, or what didn't she know?
Yeah, I think there were things that she couldn't know. I don't hold a grudge about my making a decision or a non-decision to do something that was hard for me or harmful to me. I think that what she simply couldn't know was that I was different than her in terms of my relationship to my body or my relationship to my sense of agency or my relationship to my voice. She didn't slow down to ask questions, which is always a really important thing because she was very enthusiastic about this opportunity, and perhaps she saw it as a way to connect with me. in a really direct way. People all come from the complexity of the families that they come from, and some of those families carry a lot of trauma with them. And I think that just sometimes people need to be treated with a lot of tenderness and gentleness, and she didn't know that about me.
How do you show up in that relationship now?
Now I try to be more direct and honest about my feelings, about what's happening in the now, as well as correcting the narratives that she has about who I am or who I was. And so in that way, I'm not sure that the daughter-in-law that I am now invites a lot of tenderness or care, because I think the person I've evolved into being is somebody who can stand up for myself now. If her primary experience of me for a long time was understanding me as a good daughter-in-law, and now I am a rebellious daughter-in-law, that's probably confusing. Yeah. Yes.
So we've talked a lot about growth and the wisdom of aging and what you learn over the years. What would you specifically say to your 24-year-old self that what did she need to learn that you now know? What advice would you give your 24-year-old self?
I would say to my 24-year-old self that sometimes people appear as if they want the best thing for you, and they can't entirely know what that would be or look like because they don't know who you are. Only you know who you are. And so it's very important for me, for you, young Shin Yu, young Doris, to really develop that understanding of yourself so that you can honor yourself in the way that you need to be, because others may not always want that for you. They may want to keep you small, or for you to fit into a stereotype because it's easy for them. They may want you to be a good, obedient Asian and a good Asian daughter or a good Asian daughter-in-law, and that you can be whatever kind of Asian you want to be. Next week's object is a cage. 10,000 Things is produced by KUOW in Seattle, a member of the NPR network. Our host, writer, and creator is me, Shin Yu Pai. Whitney Henry Lester produced this episode. Jim Gates is our editor. The show art is designed by Eason Yang. Original music is by Tomo Nakayama. Our production team includes Michaela Giannotti-Boyle, Hans Tweit, Amelia Peacock, Brendan Sweeney, and Marshall Eisen. If you like this podcast, KUOW has a lot more great audio for you. Search KUOW in your podcast app and see what piques your interest. KUOW podcasts are made possible through community funding. You can support 10,000 Things and other KUOW podcasts by making a donation of any size at KUOW.org. There's a link in the show notes. And as always, thanks for listening.
Hey, my name's Claire McGrain, and I'm a producer for Seattle Now, KUOW's local news podcast. There is a lot happening in our region, and it's a lot of work to keep track of it all. We'll get you caught up on the latest news and take a deep dive into something happening around the city, all in under 15 minutes. Get a morning walk-in or grab a cup of coffee and start your day with us. Learn something new and connect with our city by searching for Seattle Now wherever you get your podcasts.